You would open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Ecclesiastes 11. Last week in our study of the book, we looked at chapter 10 and discussed the power and the influence and ultimately the stupidity of the fool and how to avoid living like that and making sure that we are not one who lives the life of a fool. And as Solomon moves toward the end of his sermon, he moves into an area now that certainly applies to everybody. And I think it's important to remember that we're taking the view on the book of Ecclesiastes that we're looking at the end of Solomon's life. We're not looking at the beginning. We're looking at a man who has done everything, tried everything, looking for the purpose in life. We've hopefully established that. He's looked at the way it is for and talked about things under the sun, that is for everybody, a general lot for all humankind. And so as he's getting to the end of his life and he's writing this sermon or preaching this sermon, one thing that strikes me from chapter 11 is that, yes, it applies to all of us, but I think especially we have a message here for the young. And when they talk about young, that's somewhat of a relative term. We understand that, but in general, we know who young folks are. And he's giving some advice and some lessons that it would really be good if you fall into the category of being young, that is having, all things considered, more life in front of you than you have behind you. Okay, that the advice is good advice. And if we heed it, life is going to be much, much better. And for many who find themselves in Solomon's position with most of their life behind them that didn't do some of the things in this passage, you look back with no doubt some regret. And so let's take a look at what Solomon has to say here. The passage is a little bit difficult at the beginning, but let's see what he has to say. He says, in chapter 11, verse 1, "Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days." This is a tough one, okay? And if you were to listen to scholars or read commentators, you would find that there are a host of opinions on what it means to cast your bread on the waters. You know, we talk about our interpretive journey, right? And in the first step of that journey, we need to understand what the text means in their town in order for us to bring it up to make application to our town. And so this is one of those places where it's difficult just to look at it and understand what it means. And there are some idioms, right, in Hebrew idioms, and that are lost to us. So how is it we can come to understand what the passage means if we don't necessarily know what it meant originally? What we do is we look at the context. We're going to let the context determine it. And so we go through and we look at all the context. Now I'm going to give you a couple of the main views here, okay? And you can get some wild views from people, but in general, a couple of main views. One view is this, and one of my teachers, this is the view that he holds, and that is that here Solomon is talking about being a benevolent giver, okay? That during your life, you need to make sure that you help people and give to them when they have need, food when they have need. It ties in, it has to go with verse 2 where he says, "Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth." And so he takes the view, and it's a common view, that you're going to help people. And you're going to help a lot of people during life. And you do it because you're benevolent. But initially, you also you do it because it may happen that you face some misfortune later on in life. You lose all your food, you lose your home, and you find yourself the one in need. And you can return and go back to those people that you helped, and possibly they're going to help you. You remember in Matthew chapter 20, I wrote it down here. Nope, Luke 16, same Bible. So in Luke 16, you remember where the Lord gives the parable similar to this idea, the parable of the unjust steward. And you remember how the king says, you've been wasting what I've given you, and so now I need an accounting, and it's time for you to go. So he's going to get fired. So what he does is he says, I'm too old, too weak to dig, and I'm too proud to beg, and so what am I going to do? So what he does is he goes and settles all the accounts. And if you notice Luke 16 and verse 4, he says the reason that he's doing that is so when I lose this position, these people that I've given relief to are going to allow me into their house. I'm going to have some way to take care of myself. So this is the general view that several hold on this passage. Now, I don't particularly go with that view myself. The second main view is the one that I think makes more sense to me, at least in my study at this time. Ask me next week, it may be different. But when you tie it in with verse 2, and casting your bread on the surface of the waters, for you'll find it after many days, I think he's talking practically here about how you handle your assets, how you handle your money, okay? And Solomon himself did this. If you go back and you look in 1 Kings chapter 9, you can read a little bit later, just 2 or 3 verses there, where you find that Solomon built ships, and King Hiram of Tyre would bring his troops, and they would get on these ships, and they would go out, they would gather gold, and they would bring it back. And so it's not a foreign idea of sending out your wealth and investing it elsewhere in order to have a return on your investment. In fact, if you have the NIV, I think it actually uses that language. Send your ships, across the waters, and it's going to come back to you later on. And you can see in verse 2 where he says, divide your portion to 7 or even to 8. You don't know what misfortune may come. What language is that? That we understand this language. We have a saying today, right? You don't put your eggs where? They don't all go in one basket, right? And so why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you put it all in one place? Because you don't know what misfortune is going to come on the earth. And if you put all of it into one spot and the misfortune happens to come along and be in the one spot where you got all your eggs, you're out, right? And so here he says, spread it out. And isn't that the logic that we use today, even in investments today? It's not like we came up with the idea, right? Solomon, who was a wealthy individual, obviously, he understood how business worked, and he understood how life worked. And so as he's talking to young people, I think especially, he's saying, look, diversify your portfolio. That's the corporate way we say it, right? When we talk about stocks. And why do you do that? Do I need to say anything other than Enron, right? People who did exactly what he says here. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So what do we do when we tell someone today, well, take a little bit of your money and put it into an index fund, and that spreads your money across a whole bunch of businesses. In case one business fails, the other one may pick it up. And don't just put it all there. Put some in real estate, or put some in gold, and have some cash, have some liquidity. These are all different ways of saying exactly what Solomon's saying here. And the reason that we do that is because we don't know what misfortune is going to come. You don't want to put everything in one place, because who knows where that disaster is going to come, right? And so take a good look at it, consider it, divide it. And look, really when we're talking to young folks, listen to what he's saying here. There's no point in what Solomon says that he says you're too young to start. And he's going to make a very good point about risk coming up here in just a minute. You need to take your money, and you need to save some money. And you need to invest your money, because later on you're going to need it. And that's the point. But don't let me get ahead of myself. So these are the two main views here of what you get in verses 1 and 2. And I go with the latter about taking care of your funds. Now, he goes on to say, verses 3 through 5, he gives us some good things about this idea of investing and the kind of people that do so. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth. And whether a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, there it lies. And so as we read this, it may be a little bit perplexing to us. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth. That's the general way it works, isn't it? We've known from the dawn of time that there are certain things that you can view, certain patterns that you can view, and you generally have a good idea of what's going to happen, right? If you see a big, dark, gray cloud coming your way, generally speaking, we're going to say rain's coming, right? If we smell that in the air, you know, that rain smell that comes, it's coming. And so nature, to a certain degree, we can look and plan because of that, right? And the same thing with trees. Trees are going to fall. That's just nature. They get old, they die, and they fall. When are they going to fall? You don't know when they're going to fall. Where are they going to fall? You don't know if it's going to go north or south. It's going to fall. And so you know, you can predict, yes, I know that it's going to fall. I don't know when or where it's going to fall. What's the point here? The point is that there are people that are looking for the signs to make sure that they can sow their seed, because he's going to talk about sowing shortly, that they can do things at the proper time. They assess the risk, okay? They look at it like a farmer. In Arusha, when we lived in Tanzania, there are, and the same here, I'm just more familiar with it there, 2 rainy seasons, short rains and the long rains. And so what does a farmer do that lives there? They know that those short rains are coming at a certain time of year, about the certain time. And they're looking for maybe a quick rain to say, okay, it's going to kick it off. They're going to have the fields ready at about the right time, at the right time of year. They're going to have the seeds planted, and what they're hoping on is that they've assessed it properly and the rain's going to come. Now, sometimes they plant a week too early, a couple weeks too early, and guess what? Seed dies. You got to get out there and try to do it again if you want to have a crop. Or they plant it and it comes on time, but guess what? Too much rain. It just floods it, and so it takes away their crop. But what they had to do was they had to get out there and plant seed, and they had to do their best by looking at what they had, right? The idea of a tree, it just so happens, I was reading in the news this last week, and maybe you saw this, about a tree falling and not knowing where, about a couple, 5 children they had, okay? And this couple was going to celebrate the birthday of the wife. They're driving up the highway in Northern California. A sequoia falls on the highway, crushes their car, kills both the husband and wife. 5 children orphaned. Tree's going to fall. That's part of nature. Can you predict when? Can you predict where? No, you can't. So what's he saying? You do your best, and then you step in, and you cast your money, and you invest. You do the best you can, and spread it out. You get to verse 4, there's another group of people. The people that aren't this way, that don't assess the situation and take a risk. He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap. What's he saying? There's people that want everything to be just perfect. So I'm watching the clouds and I'm watching it, but I need it to be exactly just right, perfect, and know everything about it. I need to have everything squared away before I'm going to step out there. You know, the person who says, yeah, but this, or yeah, but that, or you know, the wind, it's just not going the way I want it to go right now. And so what do? They spend their whole life staring and waiting for perfection, waiting to reach some level of knowledge that is going to say, okay, everything's perfect. Step on in. And what happens is they get to the end of life and they haven't set anything out. They haven't cast any bread on the waters. They haven't divided their portion. And so they get to the end and they've got nothing because they're always looking for the exact perfect time. Well, fact of the matter is there is no perfect time. You're never going to know 100% of anything about any investment, if you will. You may think you do. You ever do this where you say, you know what, I timed this perfectly. I knew everything about it. I put my foot in the ring, and then later on it turns out, no, you didn't know everything you thought you knew. right? It happens. You're never going to know 100%. But Solomon's not trying to say you have to know 100%. He says do the best you can and then spread it out to be prepared for later on. And here's the thing. You're never going to know. And so just like, and this is how he says you're never going to know. Verse 5, just as you do not know the path of the wind and how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you don't know the activity of God who makes all things. Who would stand here and say with all confidence, I know exactly how God does things. I know exactly everything that God does and how he does it. Well, I think you'd fall into the category of the guy in the last chapter, right? Not this chapter. You don't know how things are going to work, right? And so he says what you need to do, you assess the risk, you do the best you can, and you step in. Well, what's a big part of this? And what's going to help us do this type of thing? I think that one thing that Solomon says here is that, one, you need to keep sowing seed. Since you don't know, right? You're going to assess it the best you can. You need to keep sowing seed. Notice what he says in verse 6. Sow your seed in the morning, and don't be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. So once I assess the risk and I'm ready to step in and I want to divide things up, what does he say? Since you don't know, since you're not certain about any one of them 100%, keep sowing. Keep putting it into these ventures, right? Do it in the morning. Do it in the evening. Who knows which one's going to work out the best? You don't know. And maybe they'll both work out really well. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I would imagine if I were to ask many of you in here, you ever invest your money in something, in several things, and all of it work out? Well, that's awesome. That's a great thing. But just in case it doesn't, spread it out. Another thing that's important here when we're talking about sowing and doing this all the time and trying to prepare, right, for later on as a young person, it's interesting to me that I think Solomon goes to your attitude, our attitude, that part of your success is going to be determined by your attitude. If you wake up in the morning and you're Mr. Grumpy Pants, right, days are filtered through those glasses. You see everything that way. We've all been there before, right? We've woken up on the wrong side of the bed. That's the way we say it. You know, a little bit grumpy. The whole day, if it's viewed through that filter, it's horrible. So what does Solomon say? Solomon says your attitude needs to be different. He says here, verse 7, the light is pleasant, and it's good for the eyes to see the sun. You know, the first thing I do and that I really love about living here is the sun. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is flip open the blinds, and when the blinds open, it's equal to my face smiling. At the same time, I love seeing the sun every day. And when you're looking at sun here and you're considering, especially in the Old Testament, it comes with the idea of what Solomon's saying of joy and blessing and happiness here, right? And prosperity, okay? It's good for us to see the sun. You ever have a couple of those days where they're gray together? Oh, man, shoot me, right? I like the sun. And I think in general, most people do. It's good for us to see it. It changes our mood. You got to have the attitude that says, I'm extremely blessed today, and it's good for me to see that. And notice what he says, verse 8. Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all, and let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Everything that's to come will be futility. So what's he saying here? One, a long life is a blessing. And when you have a long life, with all of the good days, rejoice in those days. And you rejoice in those days, one, because you should, because you've lived a long life, but also because there are going to be a lot of days in life that are the dark days. You're going to have bad days. Solomon's not trying to paint a picture here of something that's not real. You live life, live it for any time at all, and the bad days are coming. There's going to be tragedy. There's going to be heartache. There's going to be trouble. But what do they do for us? Those days, we need to take them, if we have the right perspective, and say, those days give us contrast. We can be thankful for the good days that we have, and when the bad days come, there's going to be good days coming, and aren't those sweet, right? Everything in the future, he says, that's to come will be futility. Don't worry about what's coming in the long run as far as if it's going to be a good day or bad day. Rejoice right now. Be happy right now when the dark days are there. Think about the good days. And so your attitude, as far as success goes, is going to be very, very important. And so what does he say to do with our attitude? And how shall we carry this out? He says in verse 9, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and desires of your eyes. Boy, this is an interesting verse, isn't it? And so what is he trying to say? He's saying this: live your life. Be happy when you're young. When you're young, you've got energy that you don't even know you have right now. Right? Live. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to investigate. It's okay to have adventures. Right? Do that when you're young, because when you get older, you're not going to have the energy. And if you do have the energy, you may not have the opportunity. Right? So he says, take advantage of it while you're young. And when we read this phrase, at least in the New American Standard, follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Let's make sure that we understand exactly what he's saying here. He's not saying go and do anything you want and be sinful. Right? He's not saying, like we have coined the phrase, go sow your wild oats. No. Solomon's not saying that at all. In fact, he's going to say to the contrary here in just the next verse. And at the end of this verse. So what's he saying? It's okay to be curious. Investigate. The curiosity you got as a kid. I remember running through creeks and picking up bugs and pulling them apart and doing all kinds of stuff that boys like to do. Girls do the same thing. And it's okay to be curious and do that while you're young and enjoy that. But here's what you better remember. Remember the end of the verse. For God will bring you to judgment for all these things. Great. Live. Rejoice. Have a good time. We forget that as Christians sometimes. We tend to forget about it. But don't do that. Just keep in mind, while you're curious about some things, you want to investigate and you want to have an adventure, don't go past what this book says. Because God's going to bring you to judgment for that. You're going to stand in front of him and give an answer for where you investigated and the adventures that you had. And you got to make sure that they're all in line with the book. In fact, he says this, so remove grief and anger from your heart. Some versions say anxiety. And put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. This word pain, we spend a lot of money trying to do that, put away pain. He's not talking about physical pain here. In fact, if you've got, your Bible may have a footnote. This word comes from a word that means evil, okay? And so shoring up really what he just said, rejoice in life and get the anxiety away and the grief away and put away doing evil things, okay? Because here's what's going to happen. It's going to go by so fast. You're going to end up 50, 60, 70 years old, and you're going to say, where did it go? How did I get here? Right? Be aware of it now. Put away evil things. Live a great life and a happy life for the Lord. So you can rejoice in those days. That's what he's making clear to us. Now, how do we take this from this really what I think is quite practical, right? These are practical things for living, things you can put into practical use. How do we take it from over our bridge, and make an application to me? How do I pull this all these 3,500 years forward and apply it to me, some spiritual message? Well, I think sometimes, or maybe this is the best way to say it, we should know anyway, if we belong to the Lord, if we're a Christian, one of the basic things that we are called to do is share the gospel of Christ. It's really a basic, isn't it? Now, not always easy, but we understand Jesus expects me to share the gospel of Christ. And sometimes we, like the person in verse 3, okay, we assess the situation. Well, I take a good look. No, that guy looks scary. Not going to go talk to him. And we write some people off. But we shouldn't. We assess the situation and we say, okay, I'm going to step out and I'm going to tell this person about Christ. And I'm going to sow the seed of the kingdom and I'm going to hope that it germinates. But there are others that are like the person in verse 4, right? And those people in verse 4 are the ones that keep looking and they think, you know what? I've just really got to wait for what I think is the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity. Things have to be perfect. Or I have to make sure I know a certain level, right? Before I can tell someone about Christ. And the thing is just like the person who's looking at nature and not investing, we tend to look and we tend to look and we tend to look and wait for all that perfection, and it never comes. And then we come to the end of life and we get ready to show up for judgment and we're there empty-handed. We've done nothing to bring someone there because we were too afraid to step out and tell somebody about Christ. You remember Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the talents? And you remember how God or the Lord gave out 5, 3, and 1? And the last one, what did he do? He buried it. He's the person in verse 4 here, okay? And it cost him. So what do? We need to do exactly what Solomon says to do here when we look at verse 6. Sow in the morning, sow in the evening. You don't know, right? Which seed is going to sprout? It makes me think about Paul's writing. When Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, and God gave the increase. What do? We're just sowing the seed. You remember the parable of the soils, right? And what was the point of it? The point was you got some on thorny ground, some on stony ground, some on sort of compact ground, then you got good soil. The fact of the matter is you spread it far and wide, and somewhere, it's going to germinate. Don't wait for the perfect moment or that you're going to obtain a certain level of knowledge. You got the book, right? So let's tell people about him. Let's don't get to the end of life and say, I didn't tell anybody about Jesus Christ because I never was quite comfortable with how much I knew. You know what? I'm still not comfortable with how much I know. But I can tell people that Jesus Christ lived and he died and he was resurrected and I can be washed in his blood. I can tell them that. I know where to go with that. And I'll do my best to convince them and persuade them, as the scriptures say, that Jesus is the Christ and your life will be way, way better if you follow him. But if I never step out, if I never sow the seed, you can count on the fact that I'm never going to lead anyone to Christ. I've got to do it. You know what's interesting to me here in this text, we wrap it up, is Solomon says in verse 2, you don't know about the misfortune that's going to occur on earth. Verse 5, you don't know the path of the wind. You don't know how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant. You don't know the activity of God who makes all things. But here's what he says you do know. You do know, verse 9, that God will bring you to judgment. I take that very personal when I read it. You know that God will bring you. I'm picturing my name right there. the judgment for all these things. Look, brethren, we've got a great responsibility, obligation, and privilege to tell other people about the Christ who saved us. Great wisdom from Solomon. And I hope that we'll take it to heart. Young people, I really hope you take it to heart on both sides, the practical side of it and the spiritual side of what we talked about here. Look, if you find yourself falling short, needing the prayers of the congregation, if you find yourself also wanting to obey the gospel and say, okay, I need to be on board with Christ. If I want the end to be good because he's going to call me in the judgment, I need to be on board with that. What do I need to do? How do I put on Christ? We've got a baptistry that's ready, and most of you have obeyed that gospel. Some of you have not. I hope you'll think about it, because the day will come he'll call you into judgment. If we can help you in any way this morning, we hope you'll let us know while we stand, while Matt leads us in this closing song. Won't you please?